Hello you guys, and welcome back to my channel for those of you who are returning. If you are new here, visiting for the first time, thank you so much for stopping by. I'm Anita with Anita by Design, and here on my YouTube channel, you will find step-by-step very detailed sew-alongs, tutorials, pattern reviews, and other sewing related content to help you with your sewing projects. Today I am finishing up a 4-part series on the Baby Lock Euphoria Coverstitch Machine. If you missed the first 3 episodes, then you can go back and watch those, starting with this one, episode number 1, where I walk you through the entire machine and show you all of the different parts. In episode 2, I show you all of the accessories that come with the machine. And then in episode 3, I show you how to thread the machine, which you will be so surprised at how easy it is to thread this machine. So you can watch those 3 episodes. I've also included links in the description box below this video for those episodes. Today in episode number 4, I will be showing you some of the stitches that you can do with the machine. So let's get started. Okay, before we start sewing, I want to show you how large the throat area is. My entire hand fits in this space, and this is awesome, especially when you're sewing and you're working with curves. You can curve your fabric all the way over and you have all of this space to work with. So this is a bonus. Trust me, I love this, and I'm going to demonstrate with you how useful this space is later on. Okay, we're going to start with the triple cover stitch, and this stitch uses all 3 needles and the chain looper. So after you thread your machine, just leave the threads on top of the presser foot and hanging off the left side of the machine. And I'm using a 100% cotton, so I'm going to start off with a woven fabric and then insert it underneath your presser foot. When you start your first stitch after threading the machine, you need to make sure that the fabric is underneath your needles. After you have completed your first stitch, when you get ready to start your second one, after you have created a chain, then you will be able to start your stitch at the tip of the presser foot or just before the needles. So for the first stitch, we're going to make sure that it's underneath the needles, and I'm going to lower the presser foot, and then we're going to stitch. And after a few stitches, you can cut away the threads and continue stitching. And then we're gonna just sew right off the edge of the fabric, and that's called chaining off. And then we're gonna use the cutter on the side of the machine to cut that fabric away. So this is what the triple cover stitch looks like on the top side of the fabric. It creates 3 rows of straight stitching, and then on the bottom, it creates an overlock stitch. And this stitch can be used for top stitching. You can use it to hem your garments or applying elastics. You will also find this a lot of times when you go into the store to purchase garments. You'll find it in activewear. So it's a great stitch to use. Okay, now I want to show you how you can start your next stitch after the chain has already been created. So we'll just push the chain in the back. I'm going to lower the presser foot, and we're just going to start the stitch at the tip of the presser foot, and the feed dogs will just pull it through. Okay, so there you have it. And it starts right at the tip of that fabric. Okay. And again on the back, right at the tip. Okay, now I want to show you how to sew a hem with the triple cover stitch. So I have pressed up the hem on this fabric, and whenever you are pressing up your hem, you want to make sure that it is the same width from beginning to end. That's the key to getting a nice even edge on the inside of your garment when you're using the cover stitch. So the first thing I'm going to do is insert my fabric with the wrong side facing up so that I can see where that fold ends. And I'm going to line it up. I need to align the edge of this seam or this fabric with the notch on the left side, because the left needle is going to fall, or that's where the stitch is going to end. So I'm aligning my fabric with that, and then I need to see where that fold falls over here, and it falls right along the edge of this metal plate. So that's going to be my guideline when I'm sewing in my hem for this fold. So I'm going to turn it over to the right side. I'll lift my presser foot, and I'm going to align it right with the edge of that metal plate, and then I'm going to stitch. Okay, so there is my hem on the front side, and then underneath, there we have it, nice and clean from beginning to end. The key is making sure that you press your hem up evenly from beginning to end. Okay, now I want to demonstrate how well the cover stitch works on knit fabrics. So this is just a t-shirt weight fabric. It has stretch, and I've pressed up my hem. So I'm going to go ahead and measure from the wrong side and lining it up again with that notch. And again, it falls right along the edge of that needle plate. Okay. And this time I'm just going to use my little nippers. So here we have the front side with our 3 rows of stitching, and then from the back, there we have it. Beautiful hem, excellent for t-shirts or whatever you're sewing with your knit fabrics. Okay, now I want to show you how the cover stitch works on denim fabric, especially when you're sewing over bulky seams. So I have sewn in a seam as if we are sewing jeans, and you know how thick it can get when you fold over to hem your jeans. So the same thing, I'm going to test to see where that falls. Okay, so I'm going to be lining it up right along the edge on the right side where the feed dogs are. Okay. So here we are, our 3 rows of stitching, and you can see that it went over that hump just fine. So let's take a look at the back, and here we are. Not bad at all. Okay. Okay, now I want to show you how it works on sweater knit, and this is a very thin sweater knit. You can see through it. So I've pressed up my hem, and I'm gonna measure it off. Okay, so it's right along, just a little to the right of the 1-inch mark on this seam guide. So I'm gonna turn it over. So there we are on the front. You can't really see the stitches because it kind of disappears into the fabric, except you can see it a little bit here. And then when we turn over to the back, there is our hem. Very nice. Okay, now I want to show you how to use your cover stitch machine to sew in the round. So when you're sewing hems in your skirts, pants, legs, sleeves, then you will need to know how to end that stitching. So I've sewn up a seam here to simulate a hem, and I actually used the chain stitch so you can see how nice and secure that is. Okay, so what we're going to do is go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how you will end the stitch in the round to make sure that you get a nice clean finish from beginning to end. Okay, so I have the fabric turned with the wrong side out, and I'm going to open it and I'm going to sew from the right side. Now, in order to sew in the round, to start it off, you will have to have your threads loose so that you can actually insert your fabric. If you had a chain, you wouldn't be able to insert the fabric under there to the place where you want to start sewing, because the chain looper thread would be linked and chained with the needle threads. So you want to thread your machine, and then you're going to go and insert your fabric. I'm going to sew a 1-inch hem. That's what I pressed up. So I'm going to go over to the 1-inch seam guide. I'm going to cut away those needle threads. Now, as we near the beginning where we started our stitching, you want to make sure that you are aligning the notches on the presser foot with the rows of stitching. That needs to be lined up in order for the stitching to continue along the same line, okay? Okay, now I'm going to show you how we're going to end this. So after you have sewn over the previous rows of stitching, 2 or 3 stitches, then you're going to stop and you're going to raise your needles by turning your hand wheel towards you, and then raise your presser foot to release the tension from the needles or from the thread, and then you're just going to pull the thread towards you. And then you can use your Allen wrench or something small that will fit underneath the presser foot, and you're going to pull those threads towards you. And then you're going to snip the threads and then pull your fabric over to the right. And what happens is it pulls to the back, and then you can just tie these off. And then from the front, you see that the stitching aligned perfectly. And then these little loose threads here are from the previous stitching or when we started, and you can just snip those away. And there you have your hem sewn in from the top, and then from the bottom, let's cut away the chain looper thread. And from the inside, this is what you have, a nice neat finish on the inside. And then again, you can just tie this off with a knot. And that is how you finish off your cover stitch in the round. Okay, I want to show you how to sew a chain stitch, which is created using 1 needle and the chain looper. And you can use either the left, center, or right needle. But before I do that, I want to show you how to release the threads. After you have created a chain with your threads, in order to change your needles, you will need to release the threads. You will need to release that chain. So what you will do is hold on to the chain with your left hand, and with your right hand, turn the hand wheel counterclockwise towards you until it goes down into the machine. And once it reaches its top position, you want to turn it in the opposite direction away from you. And that releases the threads. And then you will just clip your threads, and then you're ready to change your needles. So I'm going to go and change to I'm going to use my left needle. For instructions on how to change the needle, go back to the previous episode where I demonstrated how to do that. When it comes to changing your needles, I want to bring something to your attention. You may remember if you watched the first video where I talked about all of the different parts of the Euphoria, and I showed you this little hidden compartment here, and when you pull it out, it has a magnetic strip. And I told you that this is for storing your needles, your sewing machine needles. Well, a viewer corrected me. That's not what this is for. This is for catching needles that fall through the machine when you are threading or when you are changing your needles. So if you're changing a needle and it falls through the opening of the needle plate, then it falls onto this strip, this magnetic strip. So that's what this is for. So a huge shout out and thank you to the viewer who caught my mistake and corrected me on that. I really appreciate that. Okay, let's continue. Okay, I have 2 layers of fabric here, and I'm gonna line it up with the 5/8 inch seam line. Okay, so the chain stitch looks like a straight stitch on the top, and that's exactly what it is. And then when you turn it over to the back, the chain looper creates a chain on the underside of the fabric. And this stitch actually gives you stretchability when you're using it with a knit fabric, and which you can't get on a conventional sewing machine. If you're sewing on a conventional sewing machine, you would need to use a zigzag stitch. So this one works really well, and it's used to stabilize the seams in woven fabrics like this one. So this works really well. You can also use it to sew wide elastic into your garments or applying bias tape to your seams. So let's open it up. And there is the seam. Okay, now I'm going to create a chain stitch on a knit fabric. So there is the top, and we still have our stretch. Seams are not popping when I pull, and that's because the chain looper gives it that stretchability that it needs in knit fabrics. And I'm pulling a good amount, and the seams are not popping. So this is great for seaming when you're using your knit fabric stitch. To sew a wide cover stitch, we will need to remove the center needle. And now we are set for a wide cover stitch. We're going to insert our fabric underneath the needles. So there we have our double rows of stitching on the top, and then on the bottom we have the overlock stitch. Okay, now we're going to use the wide cover stitch on the t-shirt fabric, and I'm going to start off by measuring. Okay. It looks like. Okay, so there we have it on the top, and then there we are on the back, and we still have our stretch. Okay, now I want to demonstrate using the narrow cover stitch. You will see the narrow cover stitch a lot when you purchase garments from the store. The garment industry uses the narrow cover stitch on knit fabrics for hemming, and you will see them in fine knits like jersey, single knits for hemming and top stitching. So to create a narrow stitch on the Coverstitch machine, you will always use your center needle, and then you can decide if you want to use your left needle or your right needle. So I'm using my right needle and my left needle and center needle for this demonstration. So I've already pressed over the fold on my fabric, and this is an ITY knit. So this is that really slinky, thin knit fabric that's sometimes kind of difficult to hem, especially on a conventional sewing machine. So the cover stitch works perfectly for hemming this type of knit. So I'm going to measure, and it looks like I'm falling just along the edge or inside the edge of my presser foot. So let's turn it over. And sometimes if you can't see the edge of your fabric to know where it lines up with this notch, you can actually feel the edge of your fabric through from the top side. So you can feel a little ridge. And if you can feel that, you can try and keep it aligned with this notch. Okay. Okay, so here we have our 2 rows of stitching on top, and you can see that they're a lot closer than with the wide cover stitch. And then from the back, we have a nice, neat hem for the inside of our garment. Okay, and this narrow cover stitch also works well on woven fabrics, but it's just excellent for thin knit fabrics. Now let's take a look at the differential feed and why we would use it. So when the differential feed lever is set to the neutral position, that will give you an even feed for both the front and the back feed dogs. So both feed dogs will be moving at the same distance when it's set to neutral. And you will use this for most of your fabrics. But there will come a time based on the fabric that you're using when you will have to make an adjustment to the feed dog. So whenever the lever is set above the end, then the front feed dog will feed more fabric than the back feed dog. And that means the front feed dog is moving at a greater distance than the back, and that will result in your fabric being eased. And that can eliminate the wavy seams when you're using stretchy fabrics. If you've ever sewn knits, then sometimes your seam will stretch as you're sewing. So that's what the differential feed will help when you set it above the end. So when you choose a setting below the end, then the front feed dog moves less distance than the back feed dog, and it stretches the fabric slightly when you're sewing, and that prevents puckers on lightweight fabric. So I'm going to demonstrate gathering for you by setting the feed dog to 2. Okay, before using the differential feed on a number 2 to gather your fabric, you want to change your stitch length to a 4, and that will help to accommodate the gathering. So let's go ahead and start stitching. And there you can see that the machine does the gathering for you. Really nice. So for many years, I used my serger for finishing off the raw edges, the seam allowances on my garments only. And when I got a cover stitch, I would use it to hem and top stitch, but never really to sew seams together because I was afraid that if I made a mistake, it would be very difficult to remove the thread. So I want to show you an incredibly easy way to remove the stitching from your seams when you make a mistake. So I'm going to go ahead and just sew a seam real quick. Okay, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you are working from the end where you left off, where you chained off, not from the end where you began stitching. So from the end where you ended your stitching, you're going to cut the threads right along the edge. Okay, and from there, you want to remove the first 1 or 2 threads from all 3 rows. Okay, and after that is done, you're going to turn it over, and then you're simply going to pull. You're going to pull your chain looper thread and watch it unravel. That easy. When I discovered this, I was like, oh, game changer. And then you can just pull from the top and start over. It's that simple. Okay, I'm going to show you how you can make a cute little pillow really fast using your Coverstitch machine. So I've cut out 2 squares, and this one I have finished off the raw edges by pressing over a hem allowance. And this one I've left raw because I'm going to show you how you can sew in curves and little wavy lines to give it a little decorative look. And then I'm going to piece the 2 together using a chain stitch. So let's go back to the machine. Okay, you want to make sure that the right side of your fabric is face down because the decorative stitches from the chain looper will be on the bottom side of the fabric. And this is where we're going to take advantage of all this extra space on the throat. So I'm just going to freehand it. I don't have a plan. I'm just going to curve all around. Okay, so that's one curve. I'm going to come from this direction and do that again. Okay, let me come from this direction. And I'll do one more. And I'll come off from the center. So I've added in more stitching, more curves, and this is what it looks like from the wrong side of the fabric. And when you turn it over, this is what we have on the right side. Is that pretty? And if you plan it out and map it out, you can just get your own design. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take it to the pressing station and I'm going to press under the seam allowances to match this square. And then I'm going to use the chain stitch to sew the two together. Okay, I have pressed under the hem allowance for the top layer and I have clipped the two pieces together, and I'm going to leave this area open between these two clips for stuffing the pillow. And then I'm just going to use a chain stitch to sew around the edges, around the perimeter of these two squares. Okay, so I'm going to actually turn this over so that the top side is face down because I want the chain stitch to show on the right side. So I'm going to remove my clip. Okay. Okay, I'm going to lift my pressure foot and turn it and continue. Okay, I've completed the chain stitching. I added a second row of chain stitching around the perimeter closer to the edge. And then on the back side, you can see we have just the straight stitching. You can decorate your back side if you want, but that is it, quick and simple. And then the only thing you would do is add your stuffing and then go back and close this up with the chain stitch. And then you want to make sure you tie off your stitching. Okay, now we're going to get a little fancy and try some specialty thread. So I'm going to be using the Madeira Decora that I showed you in a previous video when I demonstrated how to thread the machine. I've already threaded the chain looper with this specialty thread, and I've actually changed my stitch length to a 4 to accommodate the thicker thread. You can probably get away with a 3 or a smaller stitch, but I just went to a longer stitch because I just thought maybe that would be better. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some stitching. And look at the beautiful chain that it creates. You can actually chain off and then use these for ties, for a bag, or maybe even a garment. So I'm going to clip that. And of course, there's the top, and then look at the bottom. Look at how beautiful that is. Can you imagine using this as a decorative stitch on pockets, on a pair of jeans, or on a pillow, or anywhere where you want to add some pizzazz? And there are so many different specialty threads on the market to choose from. So this gives you an idea of what you can do with using a specialty thread in your chain looper. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. And if so, make sure you hit the like button below. And if you have fallen in love with this machine, as I have, and you're interested in purchasing a cover stitch for yourself, then I have included a link in the description box below where you can purchase the Baby Lock Euphoria. And once again, I want to send a shout out to my sponsor, Baby Lock. Thank you so much for sponsoring this series. Well, guys, that's it, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.